We consider ourselves East Turkestan to be currently occupied. On paper, it's an autonomous region, but in practice, there is no autonomy. On paper, Islam is allowed, but in practice, Islam is banned. You have a mental disease or mental illness. This is a quote from Chinese officials saying Islam is a disease. We started to hear Uyghurs saying, where is my family? I cannot contact my mom. I cannot contact my father, my brother, my sister.
In Palestine, I can see what's happening. The whole world can. What evidence can you share with me that leads you to say with confidence that this is in fact happening?
We seem to have raised the bar for genocide post October 7. It's as if unless we see bodies being blown to pieces in HD, then there is no genocide.
Because there are obviously masajid in other parts of China, and there are other Muslims in China, and then there are the Hui Muslims. If Islam can be practiced, why does China have an issue with Uyghurs practicing Islam?
Islam is seen as an obstacle of why Uyghurs cannot assimilate fully. There are images of officials cutting the dresses of Uyghurs, making them shorter above the knee because they were wearing dresses below the knee. Children were raped, 12, 13, 14-year-olds fell pregnant, stories of suicide.
The issue with separatism, that if you want independence at the expense of our territorial integrity, then we have to crack down on you.
Deep down inside, every single Uyghur has an aspiration, has a goal that one day, inshallah, we are independent, we are free.
The United States is interested in doing whatever it can to hinder and hold back the Chinese, and one method to do so is to accuse it of these crimes, and if potentially it hasn't happened yet, but in the future maybe arm separatists in East Turkestan against the Chinese government and produce issues for China there.
Where has the United States been since Chinese occupation of East Turkestan? They wouldn't meet with Uyghur activists. Instead, they would use it as a bargaining chip to get a few more % out of the Chinese regime.
If this were to become an armed separatist movement against the government of China, would you support it?
Every single Chinese person, man, woman, and child, is an occupier.
Now, I'm sure many of you have heard that something is happening to the Uyghur people in China. On the one hand, you have people claiming that the Chinese government is committing a genocide against the Uyghur people by placing them into concentration camps where they are forcibly re-educated to reject their Turkic identity for a more Chinese national one. On the other, you have people saying that this is an entirely fabricated narrative by US-funded media and think tanks in order to destabilize China, a rising geopolitical rival set to one day overtake the US. These people claim that there is no genocide and that any arrests of Uyghur people are an appropriate response to years of terrorist attacks that have destabilized the Xinjiang region of northwestern China. Now, while this isn't always the case, I generally find that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. The only way to find out is to sift through the propaganda. So in this episode, I'm speaking to longtime Uyghur activist Arsalan Hidayat. He's going to share with us his perspective on what's happening in China and tell us more about the Uyghur people in an effort to help us understand their identity. Now, there's something I want to make abundantly clear, especially for people who are approaching this video with their minds already made up about which side to believe. While I'm engaged with Arsalan in this conversation in an effort to try and understand him, I am not endorsing or denying any of his claims about what's happening. I'm simply not informed enough on the subject or qualified to do so. During this conversation, I make no attempt to question the validity of his claims. I encourage all of you to do your own research, and of course I recommend that you take a look at the comment section where I'm sure you will find plenty of differing opinions. What I personally plan to do next is to visit China myself, explore this region, and speak to locals. While I'm there, I also plan on interviewing Daniel Dumbrill, a Westerner living in China. He has his own YouTube channel where he discusses life in China, politics, philosophy, and beyond. He obviously rejects much of what Arsalan has to say about the Uyghur genocide and has discussed this topic with him before on his own podcast. If you're interested in watching that discussion and getting an alternative view, I've linked the video below in the description, so go ahead and use that as a counter resource if you like until I can speak to Daniel myself. And one last bit of information I'd like to share with you before I continue with this podcast episode. You may have noticed that I have slowed down my content creation as of late. I took the last year off rejecting private work in order to focus on my Palestine content. But recently I've had to take on private clients again in order to pay some bills. For example, I recently returned from a work trip where I traveled with an organization doing excellent work helping the people of Togo, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. I'm really excited to share with you some videos from that trip very soon. But this private work obviously eats into my time. So if you'd like to help me go full-time again with Propaganda & Co., please consider becoming a member on my website. In exchange for becoming a member, you gain access to exclusive content and behind-the-scenes conversations with my guests. This really goes a long way in helping me become self-sustainable, so thank you in advance for becoming a member. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this podcast episode with Arsalan Hidayat.
Trust nothing. No laws. Free your mind. Everything is propaganda. Everything is propaganda. Everything is propaganda. So why not choose your own?
Assalamu alaikum to our wonderful audience. Thank you again for watching another podcast episode with Propaganda & Co. We have a very wonderful guest here in the studio today. We've been meaning to have a discussion with each other for quite some time. Brother Arsalan Hidayat. He's the social media director for Justice for All, a human rights organization focused on Muslim minority issues and anti-genocide advocacy accredited by the United Nations. And he's the team lead of Justice for All's Save Uyghur campaign. He is a Uyghur born in exile, an activist, and an advocate of Uyghur rights. Before working in human rights full-time, Arsalan taught in schools and universities in Australia, Turkey, and Bahrain. Arsalan has been invited to share his expertise about the Uyghurs' plight by giving interviews and provide his insights on mainstream news media outlets like the BBC, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, New York Times, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, CNN, TRT World, the Associated Free Press, and many others. So, before I continue this conversation, I just want to let people know, in English, we say Uyghur, but it is properly pronounced, and correct me if I'm wrong, Uyghur.
Yeah, Uyghur, perfect.
Uyghur.
Yeah.
So out of respect to the Uyghur people, their culture, their language, we're going to pronounce it as such. So if you hear me say Uyghur, what I'm referring to are the Uyghurs, of course. So I wanted to bring Arsalan here because obviously there is debate, just like there was on Syria, about what was actually happening. There is debate about what is or is not happening in China. And so I wanted to invite the brother here to learn more. I spoke to Aaron Mate last week, and while he's not an expert, he says this himself. He shared with me his views, and I shared his views, and I was very straightforward with you about that, Brother Arsalan. I told him that I didn't feel, based on what I knew, that it was a genocide, and he said that he agreed. But just to recap it for you and I, he said, I'm totally fine calling it repression, but I don't view it as a genocide. And I don't bring up Aaron Mate to make this about you versus him, just to demonstrate or articulate, what my views were. And so I started, learning a little bit more about who are the Uyghur people. What is their history? What is their culture? What is their relationship to China? And so I wanted to invite you here to educate both me and my audience about your perspective as someone who is Uyghur, and to tell us about the history of the Uyghur people, tell us about the geography, the region, in Central Asia, and the relationship with China, and what exactly is happening, according to you, to the Uyghur population in China. So let's start first, if you could tell me about who the Uyghur people are, like ethnically, where they're located, and a general history about, who they are and where they're from and what they're about.
Sure. Walaikum assalam. Assalamu alaikum to the audience out there as well. Jazakallah khair for having me. Alhamdulillah, I'm sure you've seen the images. Brother Ahmed hosting us. Very good host. Mashallah, you've got a really good setup. I actually, I knew about you first, obviously through your anti-Israeli, calling out the propaganda. Mashallah. So the Uyghur people, and inshallah, during this interview, I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible to really dumb it down. Uyghur people are Turkic people. They are Turks. They are not Chinese, as the Chinese regime claims. They are Turkic people. They've never been Chinese. The first time where you hear the word Uyghur is during the Uyghur kingdom. So it depends on how back far you want to go into history. Do you want to go before the Uyghur kingdom and go to Gökturks? Before that, the Hun. So we are very much connected with Turk history or Turkish history. So around 744, you see the Uyghur Khaganate come into play. And this is more north of East Turkestan. East Turkestan today, what is considered by the Chinese regime, they call it the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which is what they consider northwest China. And we border with Mongolia, we border with Russia, we border with, because we don't consider East Turkestan to be part of China, so we border with China, we border with Tibet, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. We border with all these countries. So the first time you hear the Uyghurs is during the Uyghur Kingdom or the Uyghur Khaganate in the mid-7th century, 740s. And they have this Khaganate over 100 years. It dissolves at about 840s. And then you have the Qaraghanid Empire or the kingdom. And in about 100 years, so they start around 840s, 850s. 100 years after that, Sultan Sa'd Bughra Khan, he accepts Islam at about 934, and the Qarakhanids essentially become the first Turkic Muslim empire or Islamic empire. So it's thanks to the Uyghurs or thanks to Sultan Sa'd Bughra Khan where Islam is introduced to the Turks. Then after that you get the Seljuks, you get the Uthmaniyya, and then you see the history that we know up until 1924 when the Ottoman Empire falls. At about 1210, 1212, and a lot of these sources dates, I urge people to do extra research because we're not going to have enough time to go through each intricate detail. But at 1212, this falls. At the same time as the Qaraghanid Empire, you got the Kocho Empire, Kocho Uyghur Empire, which is about, again, 1200s, and it ends about the mid-1300s, pretty much taken over when Genghis Khan comes into play. And as we all know, Genghis Khan takes over and rules the Yuan dynasty, And so we have the idea of East Turkestan. Remember, East Turkestan is a nation state. So back then we have various Uyghur kingdoms. So the first Uyghur kingdom, the Qarakhanids, the Kocho Uyghur Empire. Then you have there's a lot of fighting between various Chinese groups and Mongols and Uyghurs. About another prominent empire to mention, or a Khanate to mention, is the Sayyidi Khanate or the Yarkand Khanate. This is about 1515 it starts, and it ends at about the early 1700s, 705. This is when you get things like the 12 Muqam. 12 Muqam is, it's poetry, it's music, it's basically Sufism and traditional poetry and literature. And it's very much, these 200 years is very much like a Renaissance period for us. Still an Islamic empire, but very cultural and forward-thinking. And then in 1705, when that dissolves, the Jungar, which is like a Mongolian tribe, their empire takes over this region where the Uyghurs reside. Uyghurs still play various roles in governance. And then about 1755-ish, the Jungars themselves are genocided by the Qing, by the Manchus from the Qing dynasty. They are genocided for about 2 or 3 years, and about 1757, 1758, they take over the region. And then from about 1758 to 1759, when it starts from there, for the next 100 years, the Uyghurs and the Qing, or the Manchus, are at war with each other. There's, depending on where you're looking at your sources, about 40 revolts from the Uyghurs and other Turkic people against the Qing dynasty, against the Manchus. So then we reach about 1864, 1865, where the Uyghurs rebel and the Qashqariya, or the Yat-Shahar state, the 7-city state, is established. Its main leader, Yaqub Beg, in about the early 1870s, 1872, 73, again, depending on which sources, that he gives bay'ah to the Ottoman Empire. They accept his bay'ah and they make him like an Amir of Kashgar and Turkestan, of that region. Again, that's not long. So from 64, 65 to about 1877, he's dissolved. So the Manchus, it's like a reconquering by the Qing dynasty again. And in 1884, you now get the name, they annex East Turkestan, or this Qashqariya Dawlat, into the Qing dynasty, and they call it Xinjiang, which literally, Xinjiang, the word Xinjiang means new frontier, new land, new border. In 1884, the Qing dynasty, or the Manchus, fall in about 1911. Then the Republic of China is established in 1912. It's present day the leaders, or the establishment of the leaders of Taiwan. That's what the Republic of China is. In 1921, the Communist Party of China, the Chinese Communist Party is established. In 1921, the party itself, but they don't rule China until about 28 years later. And during this time between 1912 and until 1931-32, Uyghurs revolt, Turkic people revolt, and in 1933 you get the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in November 12, 1933. Islamic Republic. It lasts about 7 months. It was basically taken down by, and we'll get into this, Chinese Muslims, Hui Muslims, and teaming up with various factions of the Republic of China, or the Kuomintang as they are known, or Kuomintang, depending on what sort of pronunciation you're looking for. Then for between 1934 and 1944, there's 10 years of jihad, 10 years of fighting between Uyghurs, or the Turkic peoples, against various factions of the Republic of China, or the Kuomintang. Then we get some sort of Soviet agreement. We get Soviet backing, and we are able to establish, this time in the north, we are established the East Turkestan Republic in 1944. We take advantage during the whole time, Nazi Germany, World War II. During this time, we're able to, and about this time also, I hope I'm not statistically wrong, but you have the Kuomintang having their own fighting with the Japanese and Nanjing and all these issues. So we're able to take advantage of that and establish in Gulja, the place that was massacred in 1997, the second East Turkestan Republic. And they last until about 1949 when it dissolves. And that's when the Chinese Communist Party take over with Mao Zedong. And then we're not officially annexed until 1955. And we are called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in 1949. So what I'm trying to say with all this history is that the Uyghurs are not Chinese. We are Turkic. We have led Islamic empires. We used to master or rule the Silk Road, the trade routes, knowledge passed. During the Karahanid times, we had something, you need to look this up, Kashqari Mahmud. There is something called the Divani Lughati Turk. It's basically a Turkish dictionary for Arabs, for the caliphs or the emirs of Baghdad, where you're from. Everyone needs to look this up. And so, rich in culture, rich in literature, rich in poetry, ruling areas of the Silk Road, ruling areas of Central Asia, ruling areas of Mongolia, ruling areas, even going into trying to take areas in China and northern Tibet even. And like I was saying, multiple Uyghur kingdoms even in one time. And because we're merely separated by mountains and for geographical reasons. And so from 1949 onwards, I don't know how long, you're going to have to stop me, but...
No, this is great. Keep going,
yeah,
please.
so from 1949 onwards, we are under the Chinese Communist Party. Mao Zedong comes in, and he doesn't just try and get rid of Uyghur culture and Islam. He gets rid of their own Chinese cultures, Taoism, Buddhism, if there was any remnants of Christianity, other religions, and atheism is the way to go. There's something called the Great Leap Forward. We anti-Chinese, we call it the Great Leap Backward. It was a time of collective farming, pushing everyone, all the elites to go into the farm. Well, no matter what job you were doing, it was about building the nation, not just mosques, but their own Chinese temples, churches, professors, the elites, and pretty much messaging to the people, look, you know why you're in poverty? It's because of these elites, and look at these businessmen, and these people are making you poor. It's typical communism, socialism ideas, and people were executed because of their ideas. And it's just people trying to make money, people trying to promote their own cultures. This goes on for about 6 years, or actually not 6 years, from 66 to about 76, up until when Mao dies. Then there's a little bit of softening of policies in about the 80s. When I mean softening, it's still very authoritarian. You had Deng Xiaoping come into play, him wanting to look at more opening up to the West and creating free trade cities or areas, like, and therefore you see cities like Shenzhen, and areas around this Hong Kong. Hong Kong's like a separate place, but around Shenzhen and other trade-free areas. But Uyghurs were never part of this. So we consider ourselves, East Turkestan, to be currently occupied. We are not recognized like Palestine to be an occupied territory, but we consider ourselves to be occupied. We are on paper Chinese citizens. Our region is considered to be autonomous, but there is no autonomy. All our Uyghur leaders, they are puppets, and we do not rule ourselves. And therefore, from time to time, you will see uprisings. Another prominent uprising we saw was the Baran massacre, which took place, or the Baran uprising, which took place in April 5th, 1990. And this was mainly to fight against the abortion rules or sterilization, because China had pushed, I think it was about 79 or 80, the one-child policy on the Chinese population, and then the two-child policy on its minorities. So the China considers the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and other groups Chinese minorities. And they rebelled against this. God knows how many executed. Same thing. We don't, any time you see numbers of people being injured, and this happens in many countries as well. If you hear 2 people, times that by 100 or 1,000. So many people executed. In 1997, as I mentioned, the Gulja massacre. In 2009, Urumqi massacre. The Urumqi massacre in 2009, July 5th, happened because 10 days earlier, in 2009, June 26, in Shaoguan, there was a toy factory. And Uyghurs are sent to work in interior of China or inner China. One, because they are coerced into working. They are not given jobs in their own country because the Han are preferred. The Han are moved in. The Han Chinese are moved in, given job opportunities, double the salary. And then Uyghurs are coerced or forced to go and work in the interior for even lower pay than the Chinese themselves. So we've heard of cheap Chinese labor in general, but the Uyghurs, or the minorities that are being worked there, are even cheaper. And there was a dispute, there was a rumor, and this was even told to be a rumor, even by the Chinese state-run media as well, saying that some Uyghurs had sexually assaulted some Chinese women or something. And then there are clips of Chinese people beating to death young Uyghurs, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. China says around 2 people died, but we can see hundreds on the streets. Just, you can see it, the footage there. And nothing was done for 10 days. It was all swept under the rug. And so Uyghurs don't have weapons. They took to the main square, the town square in the middle of Urumqi, just wanting answers. And they were met with bullets. And then it eventually turned into a riot. And then you see the clips of Uyghurs taking down buses and burning buildings and beating other Chinese. And then for 1 year, I remember that time vividly, because we were using calling cards back then, international calling cards. We could not get through. Internet was cut. You could try and contact your family members through internet, was cut. And then we realized back then, between 2009 up until about 2016 to 17, where we see the building of the concentration camps, we realized that China was, after that incident, they realized that what they had thought, that Uyghurs predominantly were giving their bay'ah, so to speak, or their allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party, they hadn't deep down. So they realized that they needed to build these concentration camps, these re-education centers, or China calls vocational schools, in order to re-educate the Uyghur people. And this happened over the building of it. It looks like from 2010, 2011 until present day, 2025. And so we really started to see Uyghurs being locked up, professors, doctors, influential imams, 2011, 2012, 2013. We saw 2014 with economist Ilham Tohti being locked up. And all these people, all he was calling for was better understanding and better dialogue between the Han Chinese and the Uyghurs. And the main issue was the government, and that they were causing rifts between these two groups, and that the Uyghurs should be treated like any other Chinese citizen, like China says in the law on paper. So on paper, Islam is a freely practiced religion. On paper, Uyghurs have rights just like any other Chinese citizen. All the 56 ethnic groups within China are like pomegranate. We are one family. And this is what they say, Zhonghua people, the People's Republic, we are one. And so they push this propaganda, and any of these professors, these influential professors in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, they were being locked up because they had published books which goes through the Chinese filter apparatus before it gets published anyway. But now they were more scrutinized to say, actually, this sentence means you're trying to separate from Uyghurs from the Chinese state, or this is extreme Uyghur nationalism, or this is Islamic extremism. And so any form of Uyghurness or Islam started really to be clamped down. I mean, from my experience in Urumqi, when I was there, when I traveled afterwards, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and I must a big reminder to the Chinese propagandists out there, Arslan has never been to Xinjiang. Brother, since I was born, inshallah, if Allah gives me life, I'll be 38 years old. Since I was a child, I've been going to East Turkestan every 3 or 4 years, spending 5-6 months at a time. In my older years, because of university, whenever I went there, I would probably spend a month or two. But the last time I was there was in 2014. And in 2011, 2012, 2013, I saw Uyghurs in masajid, Uyghur women in hijab, in Laylatul Qadr, the month of Ramadan, Uyghurs fasting, praying. Akhi, they couldn't fit Uyghurs into the mosque, the Muslims into the mosque. It was packed. So this period between 2009 up until 2016, 2017, for me, China loosened their grip so that when foreigners came in, it was to show, that stuff that happened in 2009, that didn't really happen. Look how free the Uyghurs are. And then in 2016, 2017, we start to hear the first reports of these concentration camps. The first report that I saw, and everyone can look this up, was by a Chinese guy. He lives in Vancouver, Canada. His name is Stephen Zhang. And he mainly wanted to show the West, because he's Chinese himself, that what's really going on in China or in East Turkestan is not concentration camps and is not these human rights atrocities. So he went into Google and found the location of camps. Then he found documents of orders being made of beds and other materials being moved into these locations, and infrastructure, things to build walls and cement. And he found all this. And he came to the conclusion that they are building something. And eventually he followed and he tracked this, and he realized that there's barbed wire, there's high walls, there is metal framing and all these things, watchtowers. And this is a camp. And then slowly, we started to hear Uyghurs saying, where is my family? I cannot contact my mum. I cannot contact my father, my brother, my sister. And you started there, one video here, one WhatsApp message there. What do I do? Who do I reach? And people need to understand that with information, Chinese citizens do not have access to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, WhatsApp, VPNs. A lot of them used to, but the only way you could get online to enter these apps is via via a VPN. And today, a VPN is considered, if an Uyghur has a VPN, it's considered as a second-degree terrorism charge. Or if you have any foreign app, a Quran app, a WhatsApp app, or any Facebook app, you are connecting with the outside world. Now, these Chinese people, or these Chinese Western propagandists that are on X, that are on Facebook, that are on Instagram, they are allowed to use VPNs. The Chinese officials, the Chinese officials in China are allowed to use VPNs and are allowed to use Western platforms to promote Chinese propaganda, CCP propaganda, but no Westerners can use the equivalent of these apps. So the equivalent of X or Twitter is Weibo. You're not going to have any Western politicians on there. Equivalent of YouTube is Youku. The equivalent of... So all these apps have their equivalents. Akhi, TikTok is banned in the United States or was pushing for a ban. TikTok is banned in China. They have their own version of TikTok called Douyin. It's a TikTok version just for Chinese citizens. Now they have the red note, Xiaohongshu. We've recently seen TikTok refugees go onto the red note, and they're able to. They finally. You were able to download. If I'm not mistaken, Xiaohongshu was established in 2013. You could have downloaded this 10, 11 years ago if you wanted as a Westerner. And now the only stuff that you can see on Chinese apps, Chinese social media apps, is what the government wants you to see. They are not allowed to have bot accounts, troll accounts. Your account is connected to your ID. So anything you post, they will track you down. What happened during COVID? When the Chinese citizens then forget Uyghurs, akhi, forget the Tibetans, Chinese netizens, Chinese, what they call citizen journalists, when they were posting about the realities of COVID, you saw them live on their Chinese live streaming. They were being taken away by the Chinese police. They don't, till this day, 5,000 COVID deaths in all of China. And so people need to realize that China is probably a degree better than North Korea, right? People can still visit China. You'll be followed. I hope you get to visit China. I hope you get to visit East Turkestan. You'll be followed. But the reason why people, as you mentioned at the start of your show, there is this debate is because China does not let anyone in. They say, if there's genocide, come and visit us. You are free to visit us. They've recently given the opportunity for US citizens to 10-day visa-free travel. Come visit Xinjiang. Check out, look at these happy dancing Uyghurs. Nah, I want to go to the geo-located, the geo-pointed concentration camps. Those camps are closed. Oh no, you can't go there. There is terrorism. You can't do this, you can't do that. And you know the way they found these concentration camps?
Before we hop into that.
Yeah.
So you and I talked a lot last night.
Yeah.
I just want to... We've covered a lot of history, and you've done an excellent job. You've been very thorough in describing.
Tried to be thorough. Yeah.
I'm
not a historian. But
you've done an excellent job.
Yeah.
I'm not a historian either, and I don't know enough about China's history to offer any feedback or to have any
counter.
Points of any counter. But you. As an Uyghur person, I think you've done a good job in describing your history and your culture and your people, and it sounds like along the path of the Silk Road, as you've described, a very culturally rich people that have been part of many different kingdoms and have been part of many different empires, whether it was the Mongols, the Chinese. There's a lot of history, and it sounds like the Uyghur people have a strong identity that even predates Islam, and Islam is now a very important part of the Uyghur identity. And the Uyghur people have aspirations of independence, and they don't view themselves as part of China. As you described, you view them, the Uyghur people view themselves as occupied by China. This is very important to understand. Now, I didn't know this, but you said that it's Chinese policy that the Uyghurs are considered an autonomous region within China. So still part of the central government, but allowed to govern themselves. So I guess in Kurdistan, you have the Kurdish regional government, which is an autonomous government, but also still, part of Iraq itself, and in some ways, still subservient to the central government. So for Americans to make sense of it, you can think about the state of Florida being part of the United States. You have state law, then you have federal law. Federal law will obviously supersede state laws. So... But it sounds like the Uyghur people, despite this setup or this arrangement with the Chinese government, are not content because they feel, as you described, the leaders are puppets. And it sounds like despite this narrative of we are one people in China, It sounds like you were saying that the Uyghur people are not treated equally. So can you give me examples of the kind of treatment that is unequal? You described being forced to work in different camps or having lower wages. Can you give me examples of why Uyghur people feel like they're not part of the Chinese, they're not equal with their Chinese counterparts and the other ethnicities and minorities within China?
Yep. So the Uyghur Autonomous Region, there is no, on paper, it's an autonomous region, but in practice, there is no autonomy. On paper, Islam is allowed, but in practice, Islam is banned. So things like this. So
banned recently, or has it always? What has been the relationship with
so
Uyghur
with
Muslims?
Islam, it's a complete banning now. Yes, you're right, because I can't say Islam was banned 10 years ago because I saw Islam. I went to masajid. But whenever you have the opportunity to listen to a khutbah, they take the hadith or they take the ayah of the Quran and they reinterpret it or they do a tafsir to suit the communist ideology. So even before, say 10 years ago, it was a Chinese it's always been a Chinese version of Islam, and it's always been a Chinese version of Christianity and other religions. Now it's completely banned. And still, the ones that are allowed to practice, the people that are put onto show, allowed into mosques, and we'll get into that. But the Uyghurs, and I'm talking 10 years ago now, not necessarily recently, because it's worse now, university opportunities, job opportunities, paid less. Whenever Uyghurs are able to go into inner China, they are not allowed into hotels. They are not allowed to buy tickets. They are stopped at checkpoints more frequently. Actually, they're the only ones. I don't know the exact statistic, but it's a crazy, maybe 90+% an Uyghur is stopped than any other ethnic group. So it's these everyday things. This is just little things. We're not getting to genocide level yet. Whenever there is a dispute between a Chinese person, even with I talked about Matthew yesterday, we might get into him as well, but with a minority group, when I say minority, we don't like to use minority, I'm just using Chinese language for the moment. Between a Chinese person and a minority group, the Chinese person is favored. Their testimony is favored all the time. And it could be the most little of things. It could be between a car accident or just a money dispute. Anytime there is passports. Uyghurs don't have access to passports. There is something, we talked about this yesterday. Chinese passports, or the official term in Chinese is called hukou, which is a residence permit for each city or neighborhood that you live in. So for example, I'm living in Virginia now, and we're here in Florida, and I'm in Tampa Bay talking to you. If we were in China, we would need to seek permission from a Florida official, someone in the Tampa Bay government, for you to vouch for me that when I arrive in Tampa Bay, then I'm not going to cause any dissent. I'm not going to do anything political. You're going to vouch for me, because if I do anything political or against the Tampa Bay government, they're going to arrest me, they're going to arrest you and any other family members. I'm trying to make this equivalent here for you. These sorts of things happen to Uyghurs, not for Chinese. Chinese can move around anywhere in China freely, but Uyghurs and other minorities, they need permission to go from one neighborhood to another, from one city to another. So what I saw in 2014, generally they didn't enforce this, but they started to enforce this in 2013, 2014. I was visiting a friend's house, and I noticed that some of his neighbors, they had like a big X or like a big stickering off in one of the apartment doors. I'm like, this is very strange. I'm seeing this in a few buildings. What's going on here? Or this person, he lives in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang, but his residence permit, he didn't have a residence permit for Urumqi. He's originally from Kashgar, or he's originally from Khotan or this other city. So they gave them a timeline to go back. So when I went there, even a lot of the waiters and a lot of the cleaners and a lot of these people that do menial tasks are generally from the villages, and they were all sent back. So the Urumqi, which is the capital, was very empty at the time, and we had no idea that just a couple of years later, the reason why this happened was because they were rounding up the village people or people from other cities, telling them to go back, especially if they're from the south, because most of the camps and most of the oppression happens in the south, because most of the population of Uyghurs are in the south of East Turkestan. And so it's these things that just in general, we considered it's a level of apartheid, so to speak. So when we get to, I don't know if you're going to ask a different question, but to genocide, how does it, what do we mean by,
I want to get there. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. It sounds
So
like,
it's like apartheid.
yes, I see. So it sounds like situation prior to this recent escalation where you describe, you say there are concentration camps and they're rounding up Uyghur people, that they were allowing the Uyghur people to govern themselves, even though you describe the leaders as puppets, but they did not feel that they were truly equal in the society. And there are some major things like, as you described, people need to vouch for you in order to move to a new area. Higher stop rates at checkpoints.
Not just move, even just to visit, like just short visits. You've got family in another town, they need to vouch for you. They need to sign off on it. It's like getting a visa to your next town over.
Yeah,
internally,
even though you're a citizen.
You're a Chinese citizen and everything.
So there are situations in which Uyghur people feel as though they're not treated equally, but they're able to practice Islam. And then there's still an aspiration for independence.
I'll tell you this. The deep down inside, every single Uyghur, every single Turkic person has an aspiration, has a goal that one day, inshallah, we are independent, we are free. But the reality on the ground was that, say 10 or 15 years ago, they accepted the status quo. Tamam, the Chinese Communist Party are ruling us. As long as there's a Chinese phrase, the Chinese use it a lot, called guorez, meaning to pass the day. Meaning, if I'm able to do my 9 to 5, I pay my rent, I pay my mortgage, I'm able to feed my kids go to school, they get an education, they don't cause any problems, I'm going to pay some bribes to get them into a good, steady government job so they don't struggle. This was I'm not talking for all, but the majority of Uyghurs, this was their life goal. As long as I do this, alhamdulillah, this is enough for us.
Yeah, like most human beings, just want to have a dignified, safe, secure life.
I just want to live. But post 2016, 2017, that all changed. When Chinese talk about extremists or separatists, China themselves create these separatists.
How?
They push them to that level. When the Uyghurs in the outside were saying, "Where's my family?" simply asking where their mum, their dad, they were calling these people separatists and extremists.
This is important because what I'm trying to get to, and I think what many people wonder, is why.
Yeah.
And we don't ask why to justify what's happening. We ask why to understand.
Yeah.
Now, when I ask, like, why would I get why the Chinese maybe would not pay equally. You have this in America, you have this in other places. You have differences between ethnic groups and tribes, et cetera, and the dominant, most populous tribe, will try to accumulate more wealth and resources and power for themselves. This is human nature. Not saying it's right or wrong, but you have that here in America. Many minorities, women, people say we're not treated equally to a white male, for example. So there's truth to that, and then there's also potentially exaggerations, but it exists. So that's understandable. But to go beyond that, it sounds like the Chinese, as you say, Uyghur people have always felt that one day, perhaps, there will be an independent, whether it's 100 years from now, 200 years from now, or 50 years from now, whatever the case is. There's an aspiration. The Chinese also understand that Uyghur potentially want independence. And so because of, you've described to me that the Chinese are very controlling with their social media. Now, I personally... I appreciate living here in the West, being able to say whatever I want. I know that if I was living in Iraq under the Saddam regime, like when my father lived in Iraq, there's no chance in hell that I could say anything about, Saddam Hussein. So even though I have no power or control to affect policy in America, at the very least, I get to complain about it, have a YouTube channel and have a bunch of subscribers, and potentially I can make a living doing what I love. And I love to criticize what our government is doing. The Chinese control. They control their information. To keep themselves in power, but also to make sure that external forces don't enter and disrupt their politics. But because of that repression, obviously, there are restrictions of people feeling like they're not as free, but also you get to conceal certain crimes which you say have been committed against the Uyghur people. But it sounds like the Chinese understand that the Uyghur people may be seeking independence, and that maybe external forces can use the Uyghur people as a wedge against the Chinese government and cause issues, as the U.S. government has done all across the world. Is it because of that the Chinese people have or the Chinese government has reacted in the way that you're saying?
So there were a series. There've always been attacks on the Chinese police. Sometimes what we describe as Chinese civilians. The majority, if we're talking about China proper, the majority of Chinese live in the inner China, in the east, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, and along this 90%. The other 10% of the Chinese population live in the west, Tibet, what they call Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia. They are incentivized to go into the west. Double the salary, triple the salary, land. You will be able to marry an Uyghur woman. There is a shortage of Chinese women to marry in China because there for the longest time, I think they've let go. Chinese people have as many babies as you want, or the last one was you're allowed to have 3 children. And during the one-child policy, the Chinese families would find out if they were having a boy or a girl. If they were having a girl, they'd abort it and they would opt for a boy because this boy was going to work for the family and take care of the family when their parents get older. So there's a huge discrepancy in China where there are more males than females. So the men go to Xinjiang, get yourself an Uyghur bride. There are plenty of women out there because the Uyghurs don't discriminate whether or not they have a boy or girl. It's Islamic. You're not allowed to just kill your own child. Any harmed person, they know when they go there, they are part of the occupation. They are complicit. And so any attack done on these Chinese civilians, we consider all of them occupiers. And so any attack done on the Chinese security apparatus, the police, markets, they use this, but it's not orders given by the World Uyghur Congress or some other Uyghur group giving talimat, or they're giving orders, or it's not like Hamas or these other groups that it's well planned. No.
It's not organized.
No, a lot of this is, my wife was detained by the police. The next day, I'm going to carry out an attack. Perhaps I'm going to call another relative and we're going to storm this police station and we're going to stab a few police officers. If I'm not going to be able to reach that police stage, I'm going to go to this Chinese restaurant and do that attack. It's mostly personal stuff. It's not this huge, I'm going to be a mujahid and I'm going to storm this. It's not well organized at all.
But this is recent in response to family members
disappearing,
as you're saying. But prior to this, prior to China deciding, you said earlier that China felt the need to establish these concentration camps and forcibly assimilate the Uyghur population into China. So why did they feel that need?
Okay.
Because they say terrorist attacks. What do you say?
They are attacks. These are attacks done in self-defense, in revenge, because of atrocities committed against people's families. Some of these attacks may be because it may be, in fact, my neighbor got snatched and I'm going to do something, or my family member got snatched or disappeared or executed, so I'm going to go to the local police station, or I'm going to go and find the local official who gave the orders for this. I'm going to attack him. This is what it was.
Prior to the concentration camps. So you still had people disappearing, you still had abuses, you still had these types of things, so and that produced anger, which resulted in these attacks.
Basically, if I were to summarize, since Chinese communist occupation till now, or even just prior, there's always been a level of oppression, always. Censoring, this apartheid-like situation. But that always... It was always boiling, and it will always boil over to an uprising where a whole community, something will happen 2 streets over, but you'll not hear about it 2 streets here because you're not allowed to talk about it. And some people, you will hear stuff with word of mouth, but it won't be in any newspapers, it won't be on social media, nothing. And these attacks were, promoted or exemplified to such a level, they put X 100 on it. This was a huge terrorist ploy. This region is... No, it's a local thing that happened. And what China has now in Urumqi, I believe, it's a terrorist Xinjiang Terrorist Museum or something like this. It's a propaganda museum which they date out and they put pictures and images and they give information about every single terrorist attack done by Uyghurs. So they use the terrorist framework. But even before that, our language, they started banning our language. So no Uyghur language at school. Now it's everyday life. You're not allowed to speak Uyghur. It got to the stage where if you opt for halal food, I'm not going to eat pork. Akhi, are you smoking? Bro, don't smoke. That's haram. If you said those things, you have a mental disease or mental illness. This is a quote from Chinese officials saying Islam is a disease. There is propaganda written on the walls of the streets saying your rizq does not come from anywhere else except the Chinese Communist Party. It doesn't come from 5 times a day praying. They've changed the adhan in some villages, and there are images of this showing that, your allegiance should be to the fatherland, the motherland, to the communist, along these lines. That's how the adhan is read out. Then you had people being clamped down for just simply calling for rights. They had Uyghur blog sites, as I mentioned, and simply reporting what was happening on the ground, because you're not allowed to report what's happening on the ground. So they used terrorist attacks. And let's just say, khalas, tamam, Chinese government, I agree with you. There were 10 terrorist attacks or 20 terrorist attacks between the time of let's just say from 2000 all the way to 2015. Yalla, catch those terrorists. Let's just say I'm a terrorist or a murderer in the United States right now. What would happen? I would be tried. I would be sent to jail. My parents, my wife may be interviewed by the police. And then it's finished. I'm sentenced. I may get a life sentence. I don't know. Does Florida have the death penalty? I don't know.
I don't recall.
If I'm in a state in the United States that has death penalty, I will be executed. Not my whole not my whole family, not my whole neighborhood, not everyone that I have some sort of affiliation with, not everyone in my WhatsApp contacts. So if I'm a terrorist, I go to a local police station and I start stabbing police officers. They go through my phone. Who were the last people I messaged? All of these people get locked up together. Who were his parents? They get locked up. My cousins get locked up. Everyone gets locked up. So I go, brother, tamam, take in these 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 Uyghurs that have committed these terrorist attacks. Why have you locked up in concentration camps, in prisons, in forced labor camps, 10% of your Uyghur population? So the Uyghur population, according to China, is 11 million, 11, 12 million. According to Uyghur diaspora groups, there is a range anywhere between 20 million to about 35, 40 million. And we guesstimate anywhere between 3 to 5 million people are in these concentration camps, detention centers, prisons, and forced labor camps. And we guesstimate that there are about 1,000 to 1,200, perhaps even more, of these concentration camps. A lot of these concentration camps are in the inner city. They are older schools, buildings used for other purposes turned into camps. Then there are ones built just outside of the cities. And you know how a lot of these camps, or most of these camps, were found? It was actually found with the help of Chinese censorship. As I mentioned, the equivalent to a lot of these Western apps, they have a Chinese version of it. So the equivalent to Google Maps or Google Earth is Beidou Maps. And on Beidou Maps, researchers realized that many locations, when they started zooming in, there would be a white square or a gray square over certain locations. And so when they geolocated, they put a pinpoint and they went back into Google Maps or other maps that you could use on the outside. They found the camps and they what's the word? They dated it back and they realized that it expanded over time and they could see the watchtowers, the barbed wire, the high walls. And that's how they found the majority of these
censored
camps.
hidden areas on Beidou Maps.
Yeah.
This Chinese like equivalent to Google Maps.
Yeah.
it's hidden there, but then on Google Maps and then, cross-referencing it with like 2007, 2015, 2020, you can see construction. And I guess the assumption is that because it's hidden, this must be where the camps are. Okay. So this is an extreme thing, an extreme reaction, as you're saying, that perhaps there were terrorist attacks or stabbings, etc., in response to feelings of repression. You say it was unorganized, that there wasn't an organized separatist movement to establish an independent state.
No.
There are aspirations in people's hearts, just like maybe Kurds living in Turkey, even though in Turkey you do have Kurdish groups actually trying to seek independence and separation. But let's just say the average Kurd is like, yeah, I don't mind one day having a state, but I'm fine as long as I have equal rights. Yeah, with the status quo. But also, like you said, I have a dignified life. I'm okay with that. So Uyghur people have this, but there is no organized separatist movement, like you're saying, and that any terrorist attacks were individuals carrying out attacks for whatever reason. They're reacting, they're upset, they're angry. You're saying the Chinese reacted to this in an extreme fashion to not only punish the person guilty of the crime, but family members, friends, anyone they communicated with, just applying suspicion to these people. And collective punishment. And now you're saying it has gone to the extreme of a concentration camp. Was there an individual event, like, for example, an October 7th that took place within China that made them feel as though we need to establish concentration camps, in which you say there are now millions of Uyghur? Was there anything like that, or was it a gradual shift of policy which made the Chinese feel like, okay, we need to respond with this level of repression?
There were a few events, as I mentioned. I don't know the events off the top of my head, but it was these terrorist attacks that happened not just in East Turkestan, but happened in China as well. There's a very famous one. I forget the city name now. There was one famous at a train station. And if you look it up, Uyghurs train station knife sword attack, you'll find it. And then you had Uyghurs during 2011 to about 2015, 2016. Suddenly, remember I said it's very restricted area. You can't get out. Another argument is that, I'm sort of going away from the question here, but another argument, what if there is no genocide, if there is repression, why aren't Uyghurs living en masse like they did in Syria? Now with Syria, Syrians have allies. They've got Turkey to go to, Urdun, they've got Lebanon, but Uyghurs have nowhere to go. They either go to China, Tibet, then you've got all these strong China allies, Afghanistan, you've got Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. They'll just sell you right back to China. So it's very difficult for Uyghurs to leave. But for some reason, and this is the conspiracy theory, this is the story. Uyghurs between 2012, 2013 to about 2015-ish, they were suddenly able to get passports, even people in the south of East Turkestan, for a regular price with no bribes, with no government vouching. The equivalent of 50, 60 American dollars, you could get a Chinese passport and leave. And then suddenly...
And now that's a new thing.
Yeah, that's a very new thing, especially in the south. For you to move your residence permit to Urumqi or one of the Chinese cities, you either had to be studying, or you had to be in business, or you had to be in business with a Chinese affiliate or a Chinese partner. And so suddenly Uyghurs were moving en masse to Turkey, and then later on to Syria to join the fight against Bashar al-Assad. Now with Uyghurs, we are Sunni Muslims, generally following the Hanafi madhab. We don't know what Shiaism is. Well, I mean, if you ask the Uyghur Muslim what is Hanafi, they're not going to know. Or what is Sunni, they're not really going to know in East Turkestan. They just know they're Muslim, they worship Allah, and the Prophet ﷺ is the Prophet of Allah. Very basic. And so, for some odd reason, there were CDs or VCDs or DVDs of propaganda calling to join the Khalifa, basically, to join Daesh and other groups. And again, with the censorship in China, it's so... For example, if no one knows anything about China, they at least know what the Tiananmen Square massacre was in 1989, June 4th. Even the person with the most least of knowledge. I'm sort of jumping in places, but I had Uyghurs that left to go and study in Australia, and I showed them, do you know this happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989? They're like, what the heck? I go, see this flag, this blue flag with the moon and the star? You know that's our flag, that's the flag of East Turkestan? That's our flag? East Turkestan? What is Turkestan? Akhi, Uyghurs in East Turkestan don't know what East Turkestan is. Or they don't know that we have this blue flag and this. They don't know that they have this aspiration, but generally speaking, they know that some of the elders know, but they are not allowed to relay this information to their youth. And so we had Uyghurs in their thousands go to Syria. They joined Daesh and various other groups. Yes.
Sorry, just to clarify. So the reason why you bring up this point is to highlight the level of censorship.
Yes.
But despite the censorship, still somehow these materials recruiting people towards Daesh and other extreme terrorist groups is spreading.
Yes.
So you think that
This was allowed to happen.
so you're saying this is the conspiracy that
Yes.
the Chinese allowed this to happen to recruit Uyghur to produce terrorists that they can use as a justification. Oh, look, we have Uyghur fighters all around.
Yes.
So that's why we have to respond this way, but also to kind of allow for a mass exodus for some Uyghurs.
Some sort of mass exodus because China.
So a combination of the two.
Yeah, because China and some of these then attacks happen within China, and because China for a long time realized that we can't just keep on saying terrorists. Let's give them something, and so we started to see Uyghurs fighting in Syria. I've seen some very violent clips, and they use that as a justification of a few thousand Uyghurs to lock up millions. And we had people locked up, the types of being people locked up, because the narrative is poverty alleviation. Uyghurs are peasants. They don't know the Chinese language. But the people going into these camps, professors of universities, deans of universities, actors, singers, people, if you ask them, just like in the West, people identify themselves as Muslim, but if you ask an Uyghur Muslim living in East Turkestan, a lot of them, if you ask them, can you explain to me what Bismillah means? They're not going to know. But they call themselves Muslim. People who worked for the Chinese government for 20, 30 years, who were on the verge of retirement or had already retired, these people were going into the concentration camps. These people were going to prison.
Okay.
So this narrative does not vocational, because remember, China denied the camps altogether. Then they said, no, we have to name it something. They're vocational. We're teaching them skill so that they can get jobs, so that they can take care of themselves. How much was this Uyghur making before going into the camp? Thousands of dollars with their own businesses and whatever dealings that they had. Or they had a steady job in the government anyway.
You said something important, that the Chinese government denied the existence of the camps. So then you're saying they acknowledge the existence of the camps, but they describe them as vocational, which you point out is absurd. You say, we know how to make money. You guys are teaching us how to make money all of a sudden in these camps, or how to be plumbers or electricians. We've been living for a long time.
And teach us Chinese.
Yeah.
Hold on. These people went through the Chinese school system. They didn't learn Chinese in primary school, middle school, elementary school, high school, university. You're not teaching them Chinese is mandatory in East Turkestan.
So you're saying this is a cover. This is not exactly true.
That's right.
Then not only, so first there was a denial of the camps. Then you're saying there was an acknowledgement of them. But you're saying there are 3 to 5 million Uyghurs in these camps. Now, to put that into perspective, we're in Tampa. I think the population of Tampa is like 400,000, between 400,000 and 700,000. So we're talking about like 3 to 5 times the amount of people in this entire city are in camps. You're saying that these camps that are sizable enough to house this many people and the guards that would watch them and the trainers who are training them or whatever is happening there, plus the supplies and the food. You're saying that these locations exist on maps, but they're censored. So this guy, Stephen Zhang in Vancouver, who discovered this, the Chinese person who you say set out to disprove it.
He discovered a few camps. I forget the number, whether it goes up to 100 or not. Later on, BuzzFeed News, Dr. Adrian Zenz, and others, they found more.
They found them all.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Stephen didn't use this Beidou Maps method. But there's a very good article. Type in BuzzFeed News, concentration camps, Uyghur, China. Very good 5-part article. It maps out the strategies that they used.
So from what they found, are they sizable enough to house as many people as you're describing?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Now you mentioned
the guards. A lot of them, they're from inner China. They're not necessarily from East Turkestan themselves. The food, anyway, From what the concentration camp detainees told me, that they're deprived of food anyway. They are given a gooey mush. They are injected with a fluid which stops their periods, and it turns them into a zombie-like state, and they feel that they don't need to eat food for at least 2 or 3 days anyway. The people in the camps are interrogated, they're food deprived, they're sleep deprived, they are raped in the camps. And generally speaking, at least from the research that I've gathered, they are not taking them out to the back like Nazi Germany and going pop, 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 pop and taking them down. No, one, they're getting information. They are using them in forced labor. They are educating them. They are teaching them to renounce their religion, renounce their Uyghurness, make tawbah, make repentance to Xi Jinping. So they have like a little diary every day, every night, or every week, depending on which camp you're in. You're writing your tawbah to the Chinese government. I did this, I did that, I'm sorry for this, I shouldn't have done this.
So I want to pause for a second. You mentioned Adrian Zenz. We'll come back to him because I've heard some things about him. You've described that he's done some good work. There are people who criticize him, obviously. So we'll come back to him later. These camps, what you're describing is awful. It's terrible. What I want to know is, one, how does someone graduate from the camp? And two, how do we know these stories of rape and of other forms of repression, starvation, et cetera, et cetera? How do we know these things are happening in the camp? Is it personal testimony from Uyghur? Is there, not to say that's not considered evidence, but beyond that, is there tangible evidence, leaked documents, pictures, videos? Because in Palestine, I can see what's happening. The whole world can. Israel, as horrible as they are, actually has, a bit of a free media space, where in China, you're saying is not the case. So what evidence can you share with me that leads you to say with confidence that this is in fact happening inside the camps?
So initially, it is the testimony of former concentration camp detainees.
So these are detainees, I'm assuming, that graduated the camp but left. They're outside of China now.
No.
No.
They're outside of China. These ones did not necessarily graduate. The reason why they are out, and I'll name some names. Gulbahar Jelilova. She is ethnically Uyghur, born and raised in Kazakhstan, never had a Chinese ID, never been a Chinese citizen in her life. She frequents East Turkestan because she's a businesswoman. She goes, I believe it was in a hotel where she was detained. They made up a mock ID for her because technically there are no foreigners in these camps, but she, as far as we know, and there may be others, but she, as like in the media, she's a foreigner. She's a Kazakh woman by nationality, but ethnically Uyghur in these camps. And she tells us, she's a 50-odd-year-old woman, and she told me a story where, I'm sorry to say to your audience, but a Chinese guard, perhaps, I forget the age, much younger than her, wanted her to perform fellatio on him. She got out because her family in Kazakhstan pressed the Kazakh government. There is, if you look up Kazakh witness testimonies asking the Kazakh government, please free my family members, you will see this Atayurt, this Atayurt organization. You can find that there. They had applied to the United Nations, and she got out that way. Zumrat Dawood, she was in the camp for 60, 70 days. Her husband, a Pakistani national. She went in for various reasons, but one of them, because she had a third child, she had to pay a fine, the equivalent of about $3,000 if from memory. She got out because of her husband pressuring the Pakistani government and him pressuring the Chinese government that he'll go to Western media. He frequented Beijing to visit his consulate, his embassy, but he threatened to go to Western media if they didn't let his wife out. And each time these detainees are about to be let out, they made the husband sign a document saying he voluntarily wanted his wife, who has 3 children, the 3 children were with the father when they took her. He voluntarily wanted his wife to be trained at this vocational school. And because of his permission, his wife was there. No other reason. His wife had to sign documents as well. Because he's a Pakistani national, they came up with a reason to go to Pakistan to visit her father-in-law who was sick. And then they had obtained American visas from years ago, so they were allowed to have passports, and they all left and they made their way to the US. Mihrigul Tursun, another one, you would have seen her giving testimony in front of Marco Rubio. Her husband is an Egyptian national. Sister Tursunay Ziawuddin, her husband, I believe now they're divorced, but her husband was a Kazakh national. So these ones didn't necessarily graduate, but they got out because of advocacy where those nationals pushed their governments to do something, and they let those people out. And maybe 8, 9, 10 of those, through their testimony, we know about this. There's another brother in Netherlands, Omar Bekali, and things like that. So we know that's the personal testimony. We have leaked documents. And of course, in this podcast, I'm not going to go to intrinsically, but when I give these references, Ikhwan, please do your own research. The China cables released, I believe, 2019.
Big news that Beijing didn't want out there. Somebody inside the Communist Party wants the outside world to know what is happening in Xinjiang and the estimated 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic minorities currently held in massive internment camps there. Previously, most of what the world knew about Xinjiang came through some satellite imagery, carefully controlled official tours of those camps, plus the accounts of some of those imprisoned there. Now, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and the New York Times both say they have troves of classified documents to work with, reportedly leaked from within China's Communist Party. Both organizations say the documents prove the internment camps are not about re-educating extremists or fighting terrorism, as Beijing would have the world believe, but to indiscriminately imprison and brainwash Xinjiang's Muslim population. In response, China has borrowed a phrase or two from offshore, calling the leaks fabrications and fake news. But as new evidence emerges, Beijing's narrative is proving increasingly difficult to defend.
These are leaked files. The Xinjiang police files, which there's 2,800 odd photos. There is protocol, security protocol on how to run these camps, shoot to kill measures, speeches from Chen Chengguo, speeches from public security apparatuses, segments of speeches from Xi Jinping. And the way these camps and these orders are given, you cannot do anything without the order, without the blessing, without the fatwa of Xi Jinping himself. It goes all the way to the top. And these have been leaked. All these documents have digital footprints. They have been investigated, and it shows from the digital footprint, the digital DNA, that they were from Chinese government files. I don't know when you want to get into Adrian Zenz, but the main reason this person, and we've had personal conversations, I've had him over, he has done a lot of great work on what's been happening to the Uyghurs. The reason why people attack him, because most of his sources, or if not all of his sources, are actually from Chinese government websites themselves. This is why they have a huge fit. If China want to, take the credibility away from a person, they should attack the work. But instead they call him an extreme Christian, they call him this, they call him that. But not once have they done a good job. They've tried to discourage his work, but how can you discourage China's own sources? And this is how we know the camps exist, the images of the detainees. And remember,
why is Adrian Zenz interested in exposing that?
It's part of his job.
Who does he work for?
He's a researcher. He works for the victims of communism. I know where you're going with this.
Well, I don't know much about him.
Yeah.
I've just seen,
well, he's a researcher.
Like when I posted on X that we were together,
yeah.
I saw people comment saying like they mentioned Adrian Zenz.
Yeah.
And I came across Aaron Mate mentioned him, and they had criticism for him. So I don't know anything about him though.
Well, he works for organizations and foundations that are funded by the U.S. government. That's
so
the main
works
goal
like
ahead.
a think tank, for example, and it's funded by the NED. Well, was funded potentially?
DRL, the Department of Labor, because a lot of the work that he does is on forced labor as well. He does work in birth prevention, mandatory birth prevention, mandatory in China. So all of these stats that you see when we go into the meaning of genocide, I don't know if we're going to talk about that specifically.
Yes, we
want to
are.
ask a separate question, but I'm sort of going off into a tangent and I'm going on through these other issues.
I'm trying my best to keep the conversation
there are
focused because
testimonies.
there's a lot. Yeah,
there are leaks, there are testimonies, and we even have testimony from a former police officer. He currently resides in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, and he gave testimony at the Uyghur Tribunal, which is a people's court, which took place in London in 2021, and they came up with a verdict that China is committing crimes against humanity and genocide, and they basically based it on the births being prevented of a group of people.
So you're saying there's sufficient evidence from people, whether they were guards or people who escaped, foreign nationals, as you described, who can testify that one, these camps exist, two, that
they were in them.
I'm sorry, what?
They were in the camps.
They were in the
themselves.
camps themselves, and that horrible things happen at these camps. I want to ask you, there's a lot of questions I want to ask you. We will talk about, why you call it a genocide. We will talk about who you used to work for. We'll talk about how you feel as an Uyghur person who understands that the West uses, the plight of your people, to potentially create issues for China. I want to ask now with the camps, and we'll talk about your wife as well and her family, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
How does someone graduate from the camp?
Let's talk about why these people end up in the camps. As I mentioned, if they start, there's a special app. It's called iJob. You can find this, the Human Rights Watch, they have a great report on this iJob app. And so there was a period of time where Uyghurs knew that they were being caught because of their smartphones. So they started to use dumb phones, like Nokia phones and phones that you can't use that they can track. But then they made it mandatory for you to use a smartphone. Then it was mandatory for you to put a spy app, a government spy app on your phone. I forget the full name, but the acronym is called iJob. And with that one, it can track...
can you spell it?
IJOP. I forget the name, Joint something, Operation Platform or something like this. I forget now. You may want to put it up later. Human Rights Watch. It tracks everything you do. How much gas you're putting in your car, why you're using more electricity at night at a specific month. Perhaps you're fasting in Ramadan. You're starting to use the back door more instead of the front door. You're starting to disengage with your neighbors. You're not talking as much. You've stopped watching TV, or you're watching less TV, or you're becoming a hermit, or you've bought a tent, or you've bought a compass, or you're attending the mosque.
It's just sweeping data collection. Okay.
Who you're affiliating with, where you're going, the cameras on the streets, they realize you're sad more because that's what they can track now. How sad you're being recently. And so once there's a blip, they go and interview you and you say something wrong or you give up a word or one of your neighbors rats you out or one of your friends rats you out because there is a big thing that, as I mentioned before, you say something like, you just give it out like, oh, it was difficult fasting today. I hear that and I don't report you because I know that you've been fasting. I think someone's watching, a camera might be watching me. Maybe my phone's listening to me. Arslan didn't report Ahmed for fasting. Now both of us are in trouble. So Uyghurs are reporting on each other. So these Uyghurs are diseased. Now they need to go into this camp and be re-educated so that they can get rid of this disease.
Okay, so I'm starting to understand more of the connection between Islam and the Uyghur identity because, and sorry to interrupt you here, but I just had like a light bulb moment, and I don't know if it's because I'm slow and it took me this long to realize or what, but because there are obviously masajid in other parts of China. My uncle recently moved to China, and he told me there are mosques. I go to the mosque on Friday. He doesn't go to the mosque all the time, but he said he's gone. And there are other Muslims in China, and then there are the Hui Muslims. So if Islam can be practiced, why does China have an issue with Uyghurs practicing Islam? And it seems like what I thought before having this conversation with you last night and learning from you and during this podcast, what I thought was China's issue with the Uyghurs was not the issue with Islam. It was the issue with separatism, that if you want independence at the expense of our territorial integrity, then we have to crack down on you. But it sounds like the issue that China does have potentially with Uyghurs practicing Islam is that if you're practicing Islam, then you're more likely to be the kind of Uyghur who wants independence. Does that make sense?
Yes,
is that correct?
Because a lot of the Uyghurs,
So sorry, just to say, the point I'm trying to make, and I'm doing this for the audience because I don't know if they already understood this and I didn't, but China doesn't have a problem with other people practicing Islam because when they practice Islam, it's just them practicing Islam and there's no desire for independence. But when Uyghurs practice Islam, it's not separated from the Uyghur identity, it's merged. If you practice Islam, then that practicing of Islam merged with your Uyghur identity equals a desire or an increased desire for independence, and therefore we have an issue with that.
There is justification for there's justification for actions, because there are verses there. We're not going to shy away from the verses of war, Surah Anfal, and all the verses that lead to jihad. We're not going to shy away from this. But a big thing is, we have to understand that Chinese Hui Muslims entered Islam before Uyghurs. Before Uyghurs, Chinese Hui Muslims are very much a part of China itself. They have leadership roles. Chinese Hui Muslims, now, people have to understand, yes, they are brothers in faith, but historically, the Chinese Hui Muslims and the Uyghurs have been enemies. The Hui Muslims have backstabbed Uyghur Muslims throughout history. The only thing, any connection that we have with the Hui Muslims practically is we can eat their food because they have halal food. There is no other connection with these people.
So there's no strong bond or solidarity.
There is no strong bond. There is no ummatic. There is nothing of this nature.
Okay. Let's pause for a second because you mentioned the verses from the Quran that call for jihad. But you told me also that there isn't like organized separatist groups that would cite these verses as justifications. And the reason why I bring this up, because I'm a Muslim practicing here in America, but obviously America, in a different way than the Chinese government, I'm sure, also approves of a certain kind of Islam. But if I start talking about jihad, or I'm like, let's pick up arms, I'll be in Guantanamo Bay and they'll be putting hummus up my ass, which is a real story, by the way, which is why I make that joke. Yeah, I mean, I will be definitely arrested and tortured and waterboarded, and so America obviously approves of a certain type of practicing of Islam.
I would disagree with you. Only reason is I've been to lectures in Australia, in America, by prominent speakers talking about jihad in mosques, and not just these little underground mosques, but you're allowed to talk.
But jihad in the context of inner struggle or armed
jihad on
struggle?
war, it is a subject matter that is talked about. But I know what you're saying. If you call for the destruction, let's plan an attack on this. Yes, you.
Yeah, if I text, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If I texted every day for a week, my partner.
Yeah.
Hey man, we're Muslims. Let's plan an attack.
I'm
Here's
not-
the verse of the Quran. I'll be in jail.
That's different.
Yes.
But I'm talking about, I've been to many lectures in the UK, in Australia, where they talk about these things. Anyway, so it's different. So Chinese, and this is a propaganda piece that they do as well, where Chinese Hui Muslims, whenever there's repression of news of repression of mosques demolished in East Turkestan, they go, mosques here, Chinese Muslims here, I send my child to an Islamic school in China. There are different rules for Chinese Muslims and those living in interior China than East Turkestan.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and that's what I was trying to get at.
You are free to practice Islam because Chinese Muslims, again, they are Chinese. Now, the term Hui originally meant an Arab marries a Chinese person and they have a child, and that's a Hui. But now it's any Chinese person that has converted to Islam. They are considered Huis now, right? That's otherwise they're just Chinese Muslims. So, generally speaking, we do see stories of prominent Hui Muslim imams being taken to prison, being tortured. This does happen. We have seen Hui mosques, and to be perfectly frank, a lot of the destruction of the mosques that you see are not necessarily Uyghur mosques, because that footage is hard to come by. It's actually of Hui mosques. and Hui minarets, mosques of Hui minarets, Hui mosques being destroyed. But they are allowed to practice. There are millions of Hui, thousands of mosques within China, but there are a different set of rules. Just like there are slightly different set of rules for Israeli Arabs and Palestinians in occupied territories. Same thing with us. There are slightly different rules. Even Uyghurs who are allowed to live in interior China, they have residence hukou in China, they are treated slightly better. They have a slightly easier time of getting a passport. They are like the equivalent of Israeli Arabs, Uyghurs living in other parts of China. In interior China, there's mosques and Islam is generally free. Why is it with the Uyghurs? Because Islam, with all the rules that we have in the religion, Islam is seen as an obstacle of the Uyghurs, of why Uyghurs cannot assimilate fully to Chinese rule, to Chinese hegemony. Because they want them to be Chinese. They don't want them to be separate because of...
So they want the religion to be a secondary aspect of the
Yes.
identity, where for Uyghurs it's still an important part. But the thing is...
No. They don't even want... But they take it to an extreme level. It can't even be secondary. It has to just be gone completely so that they are not able to implement into their lives when they're making decisions about what to eat, when they're making decisions about how to do business, how to interact with individuals, who they choose to marry, what they choose to wear. There are images of officials cutting the dresses of Uyghurs, making them shorter above the knee because they were wearing dresses below the knee. Forget hijab. Hijab is pulled off. Or whenever some Uyghur elderly women, when they are wearing their hijab within their own quarters, some Chinese social media person somehow enters their quarters and they immediately, I've shared this on my, and they immediately take it off. Oh no, I can't be caught with this head covering. And it wasn't like a proper hijab, it was just a very light sort of covering. So Islam is seen as an obstacle for assimilation of the Uyghurs. That's why they have to ban it completely.
In East Turkestan, what the Chinese call Xinjiang,
Yeah.
the Uyghurs are monitored for their practicing of the faith, and this increases their suspicion of them potentially, even if it's a 0.05% chance of them potentially engaging in separatism, and that's enough for them to monitor and then determine whether they want to arrest this person and put them in a camp, and then in this camp Chineseify them or Hanify them to view themselves as more Chinese, less Uyghur, less Muslim. And then potentially, if they have proven that they get it, whether it's genuine or just forced, they get it, and then they're able to potentially graduate. And when they come out, they don't want to really communicate about what has happened.
That's right.
That's how you would characterize
You
it.
are not allowed to communicate about it. Then you are monitored. Because a lot of Muslims ask me, why don't the Muslims just practice at home? No, because the Chinese monitor you. In the case of Zumrat Dawood, she told me that after she left the camp, China have an assimilation policy where you are paired up and made to become relatives with a Chinese official. And so their whole family, if you're an Uyghur, you are paired up with a Chinese person of the opposite sex to monitor you. They record what you do. Do you eat with your left hand? Do you eat with your right hand? If you eat with your right hand, what's the justification that you gave for eating with your right hand?
Right.
Is your left hand injured that you can't eat with your left hand? Or is it an Islamic thing that you're eating with your right hand?
So we talked about this last night. So
Yeah.
this is an assimilation program.
Yeah.
It's like student exchange program, where
Right.
a student from Germany comes to America and lives with an American family, and an American student lives with a German family, and then there's an exchanging of cultural ideas and
Yep.
et cetera. So, but this is taking place within China, and Uyghurs who leave the camp are a part of this assimilation program, supposedly to create unity, but you say it's a method to monitor, and
And even some that have not even entered the camp.
even some that, okay,
Yeah.
so you don't have to necessarily have entered or graduated from the
Yes.
camp. You're saying that people are forced into the assimilation, and they're forced to not have dinner with each other, but live with each other. So they live with each other. Sometimes
They cook together, they dialogue together, they sleep together.
they sleep together. Now, when
Um,
you say sleep, you don't mean sexually. You mean sleep.
In some cases,
In
it,
so-
it turns sexual. People, women being raped. Because initially, when the camps first opened, it was men being taken into the camps. And then these Chinese official Chinese men, the Uyghur men were sent to the camps, husbands. Then Chinese men moved into the home to live with the women and their children. Children were raped, 12, 13, 14-year-olds fell pregnant, stories of suicide. There are cases where Uyghur women, it's not reported, but we have heard these stories where Uyghur women, some retaliated and killed the official, but they didn't. It wasn't spread all over Chinese state-run media. And so, yeah, they live with them. And when they sleep with them, they don't sleep in beds like we have. Some have beds, traditional beds, that with double beds, queen size beds. But we have something called like a, what do we call? It's called supa. It's like this wooden thing where 5-10 people can sleep together, like a group.
So it's like a raised platform.
Raised platform.
Like a box, like a mattress box.
Yes.
But then you bring pillows or whatever and you sleep on top, and it's like a communal sleeping space within the home.
Yes.
Okay.
And the Chinese people, there's images, there's videos of this online you can find. Type in Uyghurs and Chinese sleeping together, and they're sleeping side by side. Imagine, brother, your family. Imagine you are an Uyghur family. I don't know how many siblings. I don't want to get into your family. Chinese family comes over, and you have this communal bed.
Yeah, like God forbid, my sisters are forced to sleep
next to a Chinese
man? A Chinese stranger.
Can you imagine?
Because of a government policy imposing upon them this idea of assimilation.
Sister Zumrat Tawut, her daughter, 12 years old at the time, she was paired with a Chinese soldier. He was 21, 22 years old. Can you imagine 12-year-old daughter sleeping in the same bed with a 21-year-old soldier? And this is all over East Turkestan. And she was saying that this would happen 15 days of the month, and they would bring their food. Basically, Zumrat was saying that they had to cater for them. So they had to make up separate towels, their toothbrushes, and things like this. And they would, the Chinese people at times would bring their own food, bring pork, bring alcohol. In Zumrat's case, they said, one of the officials were nice to her. They said, look, I know you can't eat that pork, but can you just hold it up to your mouth so I can just take a picture of you eating that pork?
Right, because the person has to document and monitor and report to the government. I hung out with them. We talked about this. They reacted in this way. I gave them food. They ate the pork, which is evidence of them not really being Muslim, so don't worry about it.
They're not diseased.
I see. So now let's talk about your wife. So you were telling me about your wife's family, how her entire family, her mother, her father, her brothers were arrested into the camps. And when they were arrested, she didn't hear from them for a decade or 7 or 8 years. And it was only recently, a year or two ago, her mother was released from the camp because she had stage 4 cancer. And when she was released, she finally was able to have a phone call with her mother for the first time in years. And that conversation was monitored by a Chinese police officer. And anytime she wants to speak to her mother, that phone call is scheduled directly with the police officer. So she'll message the police officer and say, or the police officer will say, hey, you can speak to your mother this Saturday at 8 a.m. East Xinjiang time. And then you have the conversation and it's on speakerphone and he's monitoring the entire thing. And you're afraid to speak to each other and say, Assalamu alaikum. Is that true?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I described it correctly?
Perfect. So I will clarify some information.
Okay.
Before we get into my wife's situation, this is my second marriage. My first marriage broke down. And in that marriage too, I had people in concentration camps. And a lot of the Chinese propagandists will know that with my first wife, my previous father-in-law, Adil Mijit, he is a famous actor, the equivalent of Jim Carrey or your Adam Sandler here in the United States. He worked for the Chinese government for 30 years. He was taken to a concentration camp. We didn't hear from him for about 10, 11 months. And this brother, he's a big guy. When he first left the camps, people were sending me videos of him, very skinny, like I tried to work out, but he's very thin. I've never seen him so skinny in my life. To this day, I've not been in touch with him. He has not been able to contact me. And I only know that he's been released because of Douyin, the Chinese TikTok app. My marriage breaks down. A few years later, I marry my second wife. I come to the United States. We got married 2021 October. My wife's story, so 2017, in the middle of 2017, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, two brothers-in-law, one of my brothers-in-law was sent to prison a year before, and my other brother-in-law, together with mother and father, in the concentration camp from mid 2017. Then last August, 2024 August, my wife first gets into contact, or the mother gets first into contact with my wife after 7 years. So 2017 June, July they get taken. 2024 August, we are able to communicate on a WeChat account from an Uyghur Chinese officer. He's a public security officer. We don't know exactly which apparatus, but he's Uyghur. And we have weekly or every 10 days, we are able to contact our family members through this. We still do not have direct contact with them. And it was the first time, I got married in 2021, October. I'm hearing the voice and I'm seeing on video call the first time my mother-in-law. I still to this day have not met my father-in-law. Imagine your daughter gets married. You have no idea because you're in prison. In the United States, you'll be able to find out, oh, my daughter got married. You'll be able to give a blessing, even from a US prison. But in China, my father-in-law, only through that, they are able to get some news apparently. They tell us my father-in-law knows that his eldest daughter is now married. Otherwise, they had no clue that their eldest daughter was married.
Why were they arrested? Was any justification given? Were you even notified? Was your wife notified that they were arrested?
So generally what tends to happen with Uyghurs is once their family members disappear, they don't know where they are, they remain silent. They don't do anything about it for about a year. Some few act very quickly. Some give it some time. Maybe, they're going to be investigated for a short time and let go because I don't want to cause any ruffles. Or maybe one spouse is taken. You know what? My mum is taken, but my dad is on the outside. You know what? My brother is taken, but my father is still free. So in order for the other family members who are not in the camp or prison, for them to remain free, it's, okay, let's make dua and I'll remain silent about my father. But in my wife's case, all of them were taken. So they had no choice but to reach out to the authorities for example, I have a sister-in-law in Turkey. She reached out to the embassy and in consulates. She reached out to the United Nations and various other human rights bodies. Eventually, the Chinese embassy in Ankara, an official got in touch with her and said, mother, father, brother, they have been sentenced anywhere. I forget who was sentenced which years, but minimum 13. One was sentenced to 15 and 9 months. One was sentenced to 16 years and 9 months. So 13 years, 15 years, 16 years, 17 years for thinking about committing terrorist acts.
Conspiring.
And remember the notion of why these people are being sent? My wife, she has a master's degree. Sister-in-law, she also master's degree. Two brothers own successful businesses. Father worked in the local government for 20 years. Then he opened a wheat flour factory. The wife is, my mother-in-law is a housewife. What terrorists? These are peasants wanting to be uplifted from poverty alleviation? No, because they have successful businesses. And I make the other fact, again, I'm repeating myself, even if they are prisoners, even if they are terrorists, how come we don't know if they had a day in court, their court papers, which prison they held, which concentration camp they held? We've been asking for images of my father-in-law and my other brother-in-law still in the camp. They won't give us images. What sort of government is this? We can't even talk to...
So you're saying even if they were terrorists...
Yeah.
That in America, for example, if you're arrested, you can at least have a phone call with that family member once a month for 30 minutes, or visit them, or get a picture of them, get a report on them, receive a letter from them.
If they are alive or dead, a lot of Uyghurs
don't know.
They find out, brother, many stories that a father died 1 year ago. They had no idea. They only found out yesterday. Or they had died 2 years ago. They died back then? Really? We're hearing a lot of these. They didn't even know. because their bodies are not given back. A lot of these concentration camps, type in concentration camps, crematoriums. There are crematoriums set up and the evidence is destroyed. So they don't know how these people died.
So just to clarify, though, your family members are not terrorists. You reject this
No.
100%, that there was no affiliation with separatists. We only brought up the point of terrorists to highlight that even terrorists have some level of rights in
Have a
prisons
day
in
in
America.
court.
But you're saying in China it's so extreme that you can't even reach out. People are afraid to reach out and ask, is my family member arrested? So then what really is the Chinese trying to accomplish by arresting such a family?
We believe that the general rule, so all countries have assimilation policies. Even in the United States, you have to speak English, you have to assimilate to a degree, you're not allowed to break our laws. Now, remember, I was trying to say that we are coming from an occupation narrative here. Let's just forget about that. Let's just say Xinjiang, we are Chinese citizens. Let's just use that narrative. To China, Uyghurs are not assimilated enough. Us using the Uyghur language is a form of separatism. Praying is a form of separatism. Considering a higher power beyond the Chinese Communist Party, beyond Xi Jinping, is a form of separatism, is a form of extremism. Me or my wife or any other Uyghur wanting to marry another Uyghur, an Uyghur Muslim wanting to marry another Muslim, is considered extreme. What's wrong with marrying a Han Chinese? What's wrong with marrying an atheist? What's wrong with marrying someone from another faith? I am Muslim. In my religion, it is considered forbidden to marry someone from another faith. Islamic extremism. So these things that are very normal in the West, me having a beard or a woman having hijab, any form that shows disharmony according to the Chinese government is considered separatism, is considered one of the three evils that leads to separatism. It's a form of extremism that could potentially lead to physical acts of terrorism. Another reason is he had sent his two daughters abroad. My wife, before coming to the United States, she was in Turkey working at a university. My sister-in-law, she was with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law studied at a university. So having relatives abroad, having connections abroad is another reason to be in these camps. And we were talking about one of the leaked files. I want everyone to look up this. Go to xinjiangpolicefiles.org or .com. Is it .org? Xinjiang Police Files. There is a section where you can see the images of the camp detainees. You can see the protocols of how they run the camps and the orders given by the Chinese CCP officials. But also there is a search database where if you put in your Chinese name, because Uyghurs have Chinese versions of their names, and or you put in your Chinese 身份证 number, which is their Chinese national ID number, you can find your names there and if you're detained or not. So the names of all my wife's relatives, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my two brothers-in-law, their names saying, yes, they are in a concentration camp or they are in a school studying, these specific schools. And it says my wife's name is there and my sister-in-law's name is there. These two have not been detained because they are abroad. It's there. It's in xinjiangpolicefiles.org.
Now, I want to ask you about the use of the term genocide. So I explained to you last night that after this year in Gaza, we all have a certain idea of what the word genocide means. So you used the term genocide and I asked you why, and I was explaining that, genocides don't necessarily amount to the quantity of deaths. So like the Holocaust, for example, is considered a genocide. 6 million Jews, potentially 250,000 people killed in Gaza directly or indirectly because of Israel's deliberate attack and starvation and siege of Gaza, considered a genocide. But the Bosnian genocide, which some people dispute, but the Bosnians themselves and many people around the world consider that a genocide, and there were about 6,000 or 7,000 casualties. So far fewer number, but still considered a genocide.
Yep.
Rohingya considered a genocide. I don't know the specific casualty numbers, but the point is the amount of deaths don't have anything to do about whether or not it's considered a genocide. The Genocide Convention, as you explained to me, has a certain definition. You say that this definition fits what's happening to the Uyghurs in China. Tell me why.
Yes. So I'm not an expert on international law, but that's why I've got my phone with me and I've taken that article and we'll go step by step why this is considered a genocide under international law. I will repeat some of what you said. We seem to have raised the bar for genocide post October 7. It's as if unless we see bodies being blown to pieces in HD, then there is no genocide. If that's the criteria, then a lot of what we described, the previous genocides that have been recognized, they shouldn't be considered genocides then. Number two, the criteria that the US recognizes it as a genocide, therefore it's not a genocide. Well, the US recognizes many other genocides. They recognize the Rohingya, Srebrenica, and others. So does that now mean those places are no longer considered genocides? According to, and I've got the law written in front of me, one of the articles or one of the parts is killing members of the group. We know that in the concentration camps, Uyghurs are dying. They are being sent into the crematoriums. People come out missing. We don't know where they are. So members of the group are dying because of the conditions in the concentration camps. They're either dying from sleep deprivation, they are dying because their organs have been harvested. And we didn't really talk about this, but before they actually go into the camps, everyone's eye, urine, blood, organs, everything is tested. And there is something called halal. Again, everyone needs to do their research. Halal organ harvesting, where the rich Middle Easterners in the Gulf regions, whenever they are sick, they pay an amount of money into the tens of thousands, depending on which organ, and they opt for halal organs from Muslims. And this is being offered in China. And they go there and they get their organs and if there's a mishap, they get a 30-day money back guarantee or they get a new organ because the organs are fresh. And so we know,
I've never heard about this before.
So halal organ harvesting, and they're dying from this way as well. Sleep deprivation, food deprivation, or they're just dying from the torture in general, or they're dying from the forced labor because they're dehydrated and many other reasons. Number two, genocide doesn't even necessarily mean death. According to the Genocide Convention, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. So what do you think? I'm not even going to, we can imagine being sleep deprived, food deprived, injections, being in a zombie-like state, not feeling anything. Whenever I give khutbahs or I'm asked questions in public events, they ask me, how does one survive? Or sometimes if I have a concentration camp detainee, the Muslims will ask me, what's a special dua that you did to Allah when you were in the camp? And the answer from the detainee was, dua. We were in zombie-like states from the medication that they were giving us. We didn't even care about we didn't have the thinking power or the spiritual power or anything to think about dua. They are put in like this state. They don't feel the need to eat, feel the need to care, nothing. The next one is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. So the camps. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births. You have to read Adrian Zenz's report on mandatory birth prevention, IUDs, forced sterilization. The name's something like that.
Okay, because there are people who criticize him because of his background, is there anyone else?
We will get into that. Because
I want you to keep going, but is there any other is there anyone else who's done research on this?
Human Rights Watch.
Okay.
You can literally type in forced sterilization, forced abortion. All of these major human rights organizations have done reports on this.
Okay, so it's not just Adrian Zenz who people have problems with.
But the only reason I mention Adrian Zenz, if I were to give you that report, get rid of Adrian Zenz's name, because all the graphs that he uses are all from Chinese websites. They're from Chinese websites. And so it shows that, one of the statistics show that of all the IUDs implanted, 80% of IUDs implanted in China, the whole of China, 80% of that was implanted in East Turkestan. But Uyghurs only make up 1.5, 1.6, perhaps 1.8 of the whole Chinese population. I was telling you about the hysterectomies. There is free healthcare for sexual, like reproductive care for Uyghurs. Uyghurs, when they're put under with the anesthesia, a lot of these Uyghur women, they have their fallopian tubes tied, or they have hysterectomies, the uterus is removed. And only when they move overseas, they try to have children, right? Then they go to the doctors wanting to find out, look, I've just married, or my husband and I have been trying for children. How come I'm not getting a child? And they're like, the doctor goes, are you joking with me? You had a hysterectomy. The woman didn't even know whether or not trying to get pregnant. She didn't even know her uterus. She didn't even have a uterus in the first place, or her fallopian tubes had been tied, and things like this. And the last one, forcibly transferring children to another group. Where do you think, once the parents of these children end up in the concentration camps, what happens to the children? They are moved to state-run orphanages, or they are adopted into Han Chinese families, just like what they did in Australia in between 1910 and 1970 for 60 years. Aboriginal kids brought up in white Christian homes, trying to make them white, assimilation policy. These kids are brought up in these state-run orphanages to hate their religion, hate their culture, forced to speak Chinese. So according to the Genocide Convention, not according to the United States, not according to anything else, not according to Adrian Zenz, according to the Genocide Convention, based on evidence provided by the Chinese government themselves, a genocide is being committed.
So we've talked about the definition of genocide and why you call it a genocide. Now let's talk about, because I'm sure there are people watching this who are worried about the United States using this issue, like they use every other issue, to produce issues for a major geopolitical competitor. There's no secret about the fact that the Chinese are now viewed as a peer competitor to the United States geopolitically. They have risen militarily, scientifically, technologically, economically. We saw recently with DeepSeek how Chinese AI is quite advanced. People have been warning about the rise of China for many decades, and now we're here. The Chinese are competitors to the United States, and we are exiting a unipolar world. Marco Rubio just the other day talked about how for a long time we existed in a unipolar moment when the United States was the top superpower, but that was a rare moment. It's unnatural. It was to be expected that there would be the rise of China and Russia still being there, and so now we exist in a multipolar world. So people now acknowledge this reality, and the United States is interested in doing whatever it can to hinder and hold back the Chinese. And one method to do so is to accuse it of these crimes. And if potentially it hasn't happened yet, but in the future, maybe arm separatists in East Turkestan against the Chinese government and produce issues for China there. Can you talk to me about what it's been like for you to raise awareness about the plight of your people as you describe it, in a world in which people just simply outright reject it, and they call you, which we can talk about as well, they call you straight up a CIA asset. I posted on X a picture with you, and someone said you're talking literally to a CIA asset, a CIA agent, and they shared the picture that you posted sarcastically of you in DC, where you say, I came here to work for the CIA, just because you worked for an organization that received funding from the NED.
Yes.
Which I'm assuming no longer receives funding because of the recent changes by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. So talk to me about this experience.
I would say bluntly, and I'm in a unique position because I'm currently not working for an organization funded by the US government or any government. And I would say the US government have been complicit in the genocide of Uyghurs. And I'll make my claim as follows. Where has the United States been since Chinese occupation of East Turkestan? I mentioned all these uprisings and protests and executions. Why suddenly now? Especially after Mao Zedong died, during Deng Xiaoping, the Soviet era, Cold War, the US thought that it could liberalize, it could democratize China. They felt that if they brought them into the WTO, they did trade deals with them, they brought in US money, they brought in US companies, that US money somehow would change the communistic dictatorship, authoritarianism within China. Where were they back then? These plights were happening. This was being covered on news. People were giving testimony back then. But no, they swept it under the rug. They wouldn't meet with Uyghur activists. Instead, they would use it as a bargaining chip to get a few more percent out of the Chinese regime. It's now because China has risen that the US helped, as you mentioned, China grow to this level that now, oh man, we've given them too many resources. These guys haven't changed a bit. These guys are our adversaries. Okay, we're going to start funding Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, other groups. But the funding that is being received, I used to work for an Uyghur organization called the Campaign for Uyghurs, NED funded. So the notion that I'm CIA, they make the connection that if simply because you're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, you are CIA agent. If that's the criteria for being a CIA agent, then I'm guilty. I was a CIA agent then, if that's the criteria. So up until 2017, 2018, the US was silent. And it was only because it's, for some reason, the stars have aligned where Uyghur interests and US interests have aligned, that they are funding some human rights projects to raise awareness about the issue. And the groups that receive the funding, like World Uyghur Congress and other organizations under them, all they ever do is talk to governments and explain to them what's happening. They go to universities, they go to mosques, they go to churches, they go to synagogues, they go to civic society, they talk to other human rights organizations, they talk to mainstream news media outlets. I don't know the exact figure. Perhaps all these organizations are receiving a couple of $1 million a year. They're not funding anyone. They dropped the Turkestan Islamic Party, which was considered a terrorist organization even by the US, at China's behest after 9/11, because China, again, used that as an excuse to clamp down on the Uyghurs as well, saying, we've got terrorists too, we want to join in on the global war on terror. Why did George Bush align with was it Jiang Zemin at the time? At the time, I believe, yeah. Why did they align with them and buy into the Chinese narrative that Uyghurs are terrorists too? Why come to the show now? So I blame the United States as well for being part of the Chinese regime, which has led to the genocide. And I praise the efforts of the United States funding human rights organizations to raise awareness, but it's nowhere near enough. And especially now, Mike Pompeo, one day before Trump left office from his first administration, they recognized the genocide to put pressure on Biden. Biden continued Trump's fatwa, so to speak, his decision of genocide. And today we can see right now, even though Marco Rubio, who was a staunch proponent for Uyghurs, we know that he wasn't necessarily put there for Uyghur causes. He was pushed there by the Israeli lobby, I believe. Many Uyghurs will disagree with me once they hear this. But I very much worry the next 4 years, Trump is a businessman and he will make business dealings as long as it fits with American interests. I don't see, especially in the last 8 years from Biden administration and maybe the last year of the Trump administration, because if we take John Bolton's witness testimony from his book as the truth, Trump praising Xi Jinping, saying he's an amazing leader, if we're going to see a repeat of that, and we are seeing the cutting of funds from USAID and soon to be NED as well, for the next 4 years, you are not going to have the strength of the Uyghur advocate. They're gone for the next 4 years, if that actually does take place. I wouldn't worry about that. And we are actually now slowly seeing American interests and Uyghur interests again going away from each other. Whereas briefly between 2018-19 to about 2024 with this Biden administration, maybe 5 years of aligned interests, and now that's slowly going away, in my view.
One thing I want to say for the types of viewers who are watching that maybe don't agree with you that it's a genocide and they still consider you a CIA asset, I'm not asking you to agree with the brother. You're welcome to watch and make up your own mind. And that's why I create this content, and that's why I speak to all kinds of people. If there was someone who wanted to counter the brother, I would speak to them as well. Because I'm learning for myself and I share that with my audience. But for those who are listening that disagree with you, I want them to consider that prior to you working for this organization, you were raising awareness about
the Uyghurs before that as well.
And now you no longer work for this organization and you still do so. I think the idea that people have is that if you receive money from the NED, yes, there's an alignment of interest, but I would like people to start to understand that you're receiving money, or this organization is receiving money because their pre-existing views that they hold organically on their own for whatever reason happens to align. They don't have these views because they've received the money. They're receiving the money because they have these views.
It's just like in my wife's case. As I mentioned, my wife's family was taken in mid-2017. My wife started working for Radio Free Asia, which is a US AGM media, is a part of the government, US government. She started working at the beginning of 2020. But the Chinese propagandists say, your parents are in the camps because you work for Radio Free Asia. No, my wife had no dream or goal of ever wanting to be a journalist and working for Radio Free Asia. The Chinese government pushed her to. She found that as a tool to highlight other stories of Uyghurs and to highlight the Chinese regime's atrocities going on with other Uyghurs. It's the other way around. It's the chicken and the egg. They've mixed it up. So I had a podcast, Talk East Turkestan, not funded by any government. I had experts on who were funded by certain governments to do their work. The only thing that the funding that has done by Western backing is expand Uyghur projects.
It amplifies
It
them.
amplified it. So maybe someone was working part-time on advocacy. They did it on the weekends, or if they had a 9 to 5, they did it in the evenings. But now they're able to do this as a full-time job, and they're able to dedicate more time to it. That's all it's done. If the US truly cared for the Uyghurs, they would be funding military groups, and we don't see any evidence of this.
I want to ask you personally, and then I want you to tell me to the best of your knowledge what collectively on average you think most Uyghur people in East Turkestan or Xinjiang would like. What do you want to see? You mentioned, let's focus on that. What do you want to see for the Uyghur people with China?
So if you asked me this question 10, 15 years ago, I had mentioned that the Uyghurs understood and accepted the status quo. We are living under Chinese communist regime. As long as I do my 9 to 5, I make my salary, my children go to university, I marry them off, they have their children, I live in peace. Most, if not all Uyghurs, I'm not going to say all, most, 90% plus in East Turkestan and even in the diaspora accepted this. We could travel. Since I was a baby, I think I mentioned this, I was able to travel to East Turkestan. And the reason why I was able to travel freely, because I was not openly professing my dissent against the Chinese government. I was not attending protests. I attended a few protests in 2009 after the July 5th Urumqi riots, but other than that, to be able to travel back and forth to East Turkestan to see family members, I wasn't a public advocate. And so that would be most of the Uyghurs, and even I would have accepted that. Khalas, make dua one day. But deep down inside, 100% of the Uyghurs, deep down inside, they aspire for independent, free East Turkestan. They live their religion freely. They want to be able to talk to their family freely, visit each other freely. They want to educate their children with their own ideologies. They want to teach them their religion, their culture. They want to speak their own language. They want to be able to talk on their phone with their parents. We don't even have this right, this privilege. Today, I would say 100% of Uyghurs, again, deep down aspire for a free East Turkestan. the initial percentage of active activists has risen because of the concentration camps. Because hold on, you're punishing me and my family for not being against China. I might as well join the separatist club, right?
So there's an increase in desire for independence because of China's actions.
Yes.
Where in the past, most Uyghurs would have been willing to accept so long as there was some level of freedom.
And my evidence for this is that, remember I said initially when the camps were open, that China cut off all communication. We did not know, or people did not know where their family members were. For the past year or two, as we mentioned with my wife, Uyghurs have been able to communicate with their family members through a Chinese police officer on their WeChat account. Once they're able to see their parents, a lot of activists have dropped off the scene. You don't see them anymore. Two, there are Uyghurs able to go to East Turkestan to visit their family members on guided tours. And they are very heavily monitored. They can visit them, or they have to stay in a hotel where they're monitored, and then they're able to go back. So for these little privileges, a lot of Uyghurs have dropped off the scene so that they can gain the necessary points to be able to either obtain a visa or to obtain even visa-free travel. This visa-free travel that's been happening, even with that, it's not totally visa-free. You still need to get permission from your local neighborhood committee, which is a grassroots government organization within your own local neighborhood before you became a citizen of your Western country. You still need to get permission from them to be able to go and visit your family. So for these little privileges, already we are seeing Uyghurs drop off that ultimate goal for fighting, not even fighting, for protesting and holding up slogans, free East Turkestan, or holding up a flag.
Many critics who are worried about U.S. empire and overreach and meddling in the affairs of other countries, their concern is that one day this issue would be used as a wedge against China in the form of an armed separatist movement. I don't know if you feel comfortable answering this or not, but I'm curious to ask you, if this were to become an armed separatist movement, a civil war or an uprising that's violent and uses the use of arms against the government of China, would you support it?
One, I want to start off the question that Uyghurs can never be separatists, and there will never ever be a separatist movement.
Why?
Because we do not consider China, we do not consider to be part of China in the first place.
Okay, so the language you take issue with. Okay.
We are occupied. Under international law, occupied peoples have a right to bear arms to defend themselves. And any act committed that China labels terrorists, I would consider, one, it's not a broader, professional attack given by orders from the outside. Again, these are personal vendettas. This is one. So such movement has not taken place. But if there were to be, I would totally support.
You would?
Yes, and would not be separatist.
I really appreciate you, coming out here with your wife and sharing with me your personal life experience and educating me about your perspective. Thanks for coming out, and we'll definitely follow up on this, inshallah.
Inshallah.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. Also, if you'd like to support what we do, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on our website, where we post exclusive documentaries, podcasts, and videos just like this one about geopolitics, current events, and history. We built this website because of continued censorship of our videos, so please do consider becoming a member. Until next time.